Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I've got a very interesting gentleman, Edvin Kornelius, joining us tonight from Latvia, from Riga, Latvia. Edwin is an independent strategy and risk consultant with extensive corporate banking experience, primarily across Northern Europe and Eastern Europe, of which close to 15 years were devoted to servicing global multinationals and international corporates from Scandinavia and Finland to Russia. And he wanted to join us today to tell us a little bit about what is happening with the economy in the Baltic states, in Latvia particularly, and also in Ukraine and in Russia. Someone obviously that's very close to what's going on from an economic standpoint, from a military standpoint, from a political standpoint, in the war of Russia invading Ukraine. Edvin, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So just to orient all the Torontonian listeners, where are you?
Yeah. Thank you so much for inviting me, Brian. My pleasure. I'm right now in Riga, which is the capital of Latvia. So some people probably know that Latvia is one of the three Baltic states on the shore of the Baltic Sea and the former Republic of the Soviet Union before it was so to speak, deoccupied and became independent in 1991. My personal background is corporate banking. I was born in Latvia, but then I spent almost 4 years studying my graduate studies in economics in the US, in Michigan. Then I was back in banking in the Baltics in Latvia, and then most of my career worked for as we call it Nordic Northern European banks, Swedish, Danish, and Finnish. And working for one of the largest Danish banks, I also spent as a CEO of the bank in Russia for almost 15 years. My kids were grown up till they were 13 in Russia. We were mostly based in St. Petersburg, but then also spent 3 years living in Moscow. And of course, for obvious reasons, when the war started in 2022, we left. It took some time, because it was a process to resettle, to reallocate, to grab kids and cats and all the stuff and move it. So we are back. My wife is in a hotel business, working for quite well-known Radisson Hotel Group, and I'm a consultant right now, dealing primarily with Central Asia, South Caucasus, and Ukraine, helping Western companies with intelligence, with funding, with due diligence on partners, and yes, historically.
Were there restrictions? Yeah? Were there restrictions put on you when you left Moscow?
In what terms? You mean in terms of moving out? So
moving from Russia to back to Latvia at the start of the war, and you wanted to leave. Was it difficult? Were there restrictions, or was it easy for you to get out?
No, it were no restrictions. They actually still no restrictions. Borders between the Baltic countries, so they are opened. People can get visas if they want, even electronic ones, and people can cross the border, both with Russia and Belarus.
We've heard that there's potentially millions of Russians that have left Russia. Is that true?
Yes and no. I think so. If we talk about total number of Russians living in the West, yes, of course we talk about millions. Your question most likely is about people who left when the war started. I cannot give a precise number. It could be close to a million. Most of them are probably settled in the neighboring countries, such as Kazakhstan, Georgia, Armenia. Many of them settled. Many of them returned back. I think statistics on that is quite weak. So talking about specific numbers is difficult. But of course, if you go to Tbilisi, the capital of Georgia, you will see a lot of Russians, owners of cafes, just visitors, people living there. So people doing business there. But of course, Georgia, Tbilisi, so it's a quite specific place. No diplomatic relationship officially, but free border and no visas for Russians, so they quite easily can go in and out.
Let's talk about the Ukrainian economy. What do you think is the state of the Ukrainian economy? I understand it lost 30% of its GDP initially. Can it survive? Can it build a sustainable economy?
It's resilient. First of all, thanks to aid what Ukraine received and continued to receive from the Western countries. You probably heard about the debate, who gave more to Ukraine, the US or the EU. Of course, the EU. But let's don't go into much details on that. In any case, we talk about billions. We talk a cumulative amount of over 100 billion. And it helped Ukraine to be in good shape military. And it also helped to run the economy in a quite a successful mode. I was in Kiev 2 weeks ago for more than a week, and I was positively surprised about resiliency of people, of the economy, of businesses. So I think Ukraine, despite all the challenges, despite the tremendous pressure and loss of a lot of good people, who are killed on the front line, bombarded, and killed in their homes, they are doing, I believe, quite well.
That's amazing. How can the economy be so resilient? How can the people be so resilient and doing well in the face of nightly bombing raids and losing 20% of their territory and having so many people losing their life in bombing raids and or at the front line? How is that possible, do you think?
Yeah, it's surprising. I believe it, first of all, comes from this free mindset. Ukrainians, they don't want to be controlled by Russians. They don't want that their story becomes the same story as what happened with Georgia. They want to decide themselves about their future, and they want to be closer, or even much closer to the Western society, than to Russia. So this is a psychological booster, what gives a lot of power for Ukrainians to fight this war. And another thing, it turned out, and this also was kind of a bit a surprise to me, that economy was, even before the war, in a good shape. During the wartime, you become, so to speak, ready to fight. You come to the fight mode, and I think what also happened with the Ukrainians, that they became stronger under the tough circumstances, what also helped them a lot.
Remind us, Ukraine is the second largest country from a landmass standpoint in Europe, but I understand it's the poorest. Is that correct?
It's the second largest country. It's quite rich in terms of agriculture land. Despite all the big discussions about minerals, I don't think so. It's so rich, so like as what we read in international press, especially because extraction of rare earth and other minerals in Ukraine might be quite expensive. So therefore, all this discussion about minerals and a potential deal what the US could make with Ukraine, I think so. It's more kind of a geopolitical exercise rather than the business economic one.
And from a GDP standpoint, it is the poorest country in Europe at $5,500 per year.
Yes, this is something so what can again be discussed. In terms of nominal GDP, yes. But then when you calculate it, so like on a purchasing power basis, it doesn't look so bad. And of course, like on a personal level, I actually have chosen a route going to Kiev by bus, and on purpose have chosen like two different highways, so like to and from Poland. So therefore, what I saw by my own eyes in Kiev, definitely not poor at all. Very developed, very nice, modern, developed city. And in the rural areas, well, it also looked quite okay. It didn't look much different from what we could see in the rural areas in the Baltic states.
But a reasonably large population, particularly when you compare it to the Baltic states. Is that not the case? 40 million people before the war, 35 or 36 million today? And you put it in perspective, most of the Baltic states are less than 10 million, less than 5 million. Is that not the case?
Absolutely. So like Baltics is relatively small. Ukraine is probably top 5 to top 6, top 7 country in Europe. So population-wise, it is the size of Poland before the war. Now it just depends how you calculate that. So like roughly out of the 40 million, probably between 5 and 7 million, so they don't live in Ukraine right now. Part of the population, so like on the Russian side. Larger part of population is in on the western side, mostly Poland, Czech Republic, Slovenia, Slovakia, and of course Germany.
So what do you think about the chances for an economic recovery? Can they survive on themselves? Do they need to be integrated in the EU? If Putin is successful in demanding that it can't join the EU, what are the prospects for Ukraine long term, do you think?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. And it definitely depends on how the war will continue. How long will it take? What will be the outcome? And what will be kind of an arrangement? And also most important, assuming so that arranging is so that Europe, the EU, is behind this future peace, what will be in investment, what Europe will be prepared to make in Ukraine. This is one side of the coin. Another side of the coin, and this is also like kind of a super complex topic to discuss. It's about investment climate in Ukraine. My feeling during the visit was that it's not enough success stories of international companies investing in Ukraine. And I even participating in few forums, events. I even mentioned that to organizers, and we agreed to exchange information about success stories. And actually, I got some of good stories, what I now share in social networks. So like where Western European companies invested significant amounts, and this was quite a success. But it needs to be multiplied. It needs like to be shared to international community. So and then it will be a booster in addition. So like to all the possible aid and grant arrangements. So like coming from the EU.
Now, your own country, Latvia, joined the EU. How beneficial was that?
It's a fantastic. You know what a coincidence. This morning, it was a publication. I think it was European Parliament who published this, and then it was a question about satisfaction of EU countries about being in the EU. Average level was 74%, and then. What's a big surprise to me, Latvia has one of the lowest levels. I think it was 63 or 64%, and then countries around have much larger percentages. Lithuania 91%. So, like in fact, there is a huge difference how the countries see whether membership in the EU was or is beneficial for them or not. And specifically about Latvia, economically, Latvia is comparatively comparing to the neighbors is doing worse. And I think so. This might be an issue going forward. Also, like thinking of a potential Russian control of this specific country. So, like if we talk about Latvia, considering of a very significant percentage of Russian origin population.
How is that population being dealt with by the balance of Latvia? Is there concern? Is there terrorism? Is there jealousy? Is there let me ask you, what is the reaction? What is the relationship between regular Latvians and the Latvians that are from Russia?
I think that many things changed when the war started. People became less open, so like in discussing things, including between the people of a different background. I think Russian origin people, they perceive the war and its potential consequences differently. And of course, so like it creates a potential kind of division of the opinions how to run the country in the future. So if you look into the map, then you would easily recognize Latvia is one of the most funniest countries in Europe, being squeezed between Russia on the east, Baltic Sea on the west, Estonia on the north, and Lithuania on the south. From a kind of closest neighbor's point of view, so then it's like three countries I mentioned plus Belarus, and then economic survival question, economic sustainability question is, well, if we see this war, the war continuing for many more years, what will be our economic model going forward? How do we rebuild our economy, potentially not being tired and not doing any business with Russia? So I think it's the most challenging question. And I think so, like many Russian origin guys, so they would probably say it's impossible. I do believe it's possible. It's complicated. It requires a lot of political will, leadership, hard work, and it remains to be seen. The time will tell if we manage.
Prior to the fall of the Berlin Wall and independence, the vast majority of your trade would have been between Latvia and Russia. What is it today? Is it still sizable, or is it diminished dramatically?
This was much worse than how you described it. Baltic states were kind of front line of the Soviet Union, kept in a quite good economic shape comparing to other parts of the Soviet Union. And Latvia was a specific place for assembling a lot of ready-made products and goods. So many components were shipped over to Latvia, and then finished goods were assembled here. Then you can imagine, so when the Soviet Union collapsed, all the supply chains collapsed as well. So most of the production facilities and factories, they went out of business, so they got bankrupt. So therefore, in this period from collapse of the Soviet Union / regaining an independence, and today, specifically before the war, the Baltics countries were focused on three areas: transit, access to the Baltic Sea ports via highways and railways. It's trading of goods, and it's tourism. Historically, we used, before the war, to have a lot of tourists coming from Russia to all three Baltic countries. Of course, volumes are significantly down for all these three areas. And now thinking about the future, okay, where we are going to be in 5 to 10 years from now, with or without this trade and tourists flows from Russia or not. And a model and how this model will be run will depend on that subject, and assuming so that war stops sooner or later, rather sooner.
You also border Belarus. Is there much trade or interaction with Belarus?
Yes, of course, because it's also a railway connection to Belarus, and Belarus historically was less sanctioned than Russia. So therefore, many economic activities they go involving Belarus, including some Chinese interests. So Chinese, so they are quite present in Belarus, and in terms of the kind of a pan-European expansion, Belarus was seen for quite a long time, so like as a base for expansion.
This is a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate you joining us. We're going to take a break, and when I come back, I'm going to ask you about corruption in Ukraine, because that, I think, is one of the things that a lot of people talk about as being one of the biggest challenges that Ukraine has got to face. And there's been some criticism about military contributions to Ukraine, and have they been misdirected? I think that lots of people wonder about why Ukraine hasn't been able to do more to stem corruption. Let's take a break for 2 minutes and come back with our guest, Edvin Kornelius, who is a banking expert, economist, strategy consultant in the Baltic states and in Eastern Europe, talking about the Ukrainian economy and what's going to happen in the future. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. My guest tonight is Edvin Kornelius. I'm sorry about that. He is a banking expert. He worked and lived for, did you say 15 years in Moscow and St. Petersburg, and obviously is very knowledgeable about what's going on in Eastern Europe. And and Latvia, particularly obviously where he's calling into us from today, but also Ukraine, and he was in Kyiv just 2 weeks ago. Is corruption still there?
Corruption is everywhere. Corruption is in every country. It just depends on two things. So, like, how extensive is that, and how do you or society or investors perceive that? Ukrainian is a very, very complex case. First of all, so that perception about corruption is that Ukraine is corrupt. For many years before the war, during the war, in all this corruption, transparency, perception indexes, Ukraine was always in red. But I'll give you two good stories. About this. First, I met at least two Western companies, one American, and CEOs of these companies are people whom I know very well for many years, so that then I trust you. And literally what they say, yes, it's difficult to do all the things right. It's difficult not to try to push things forward, hiring consultants and finding the ways around, but it's possible. Once you prove to the market so that you don't want ever to be involved in corruption, you can operate, and you can operate successfully. And the most important rule is, well, never give up. So, like, if you do things once, if you get involved in corruption once, then you're on the hook. So then you would be always part of the corrupt environment. Second thing, this was not my first time in Ukraine. I was there many times in the 90s, and then I also was in Ukraine before the war. Actually, a month and a half before the war. My personal reflections, talking to people and asking them specifically what do they do to fight corruption on the corporate level, on a compliance level, I got a feeling that much more is being done. So therefore, I definitely felt and believe there is a positive trend in improving the environment and fighting the corruption.
I spent some time in Kyiv, Ukraine in 2006 to 2008, and corruption was everywhere. And we were warned that, the fire inspector would expect money, the health inspector would expect money, the border agents would expect money, that we didn't want to be pulled over by the police because if we wanted to get out of a ticket, we would be paying, particularly given that we are obviously not local Ukrainians. And there was a big concern, such that the companies that I was represented didn't want to make the investment in the end. How have they changed that, or has it changed?
Well, I think so. So that 2006, 2008, I think so. This was a challenging time, still a challenging time for almost all former Soviet republics. Maybe actually, except Georgia, which was just a fantastic success story. You maybe heard about Saakashvili and about his anti-corruption reform. So it was kind of a lot of talks, so that from one of the most corrupt countries in the former Soviet Union area, Georgia became the least corrupt, including corruption in the police. So actually, these kind of stories, what you are saying right now, can be given about Ukraine. It can be given about Belarus, Central Asia, Caucasus. So it can be definitely be given about Russia. But let me just give you just one example. So like maybe explaining what I said, answering your question better. In Russia, we, as a bank, serviced exclusively Scandinavian, Finnish corporates and multinationals, the largest UK, US, and German companies. These guys were not involved in corruption, and actually, I had to do due diligence on them as my customers. Even it came to absurd. So then, when my head office asked top vault branches to go and check and run a due diligence, and then when I just asked him the question, so what? Are you serious, guys? So do you expect me? So like expect me to go and check these guys? You know what the answer was? The answer was, well, come on. There are Russians running this company. So therefore, you have to make sure so that you deal with the customers running by Russians and involved in corruption. But just adding from my personal experience, look, of course, banking is supervised very well in most of the countries. So like, and of course, banking was and actually is still quite well supervised in Russia. We were never offered a bribe. We never had to pay any bribe. So in fact, if we take banking, I doubt so that if you go like to a banking business in Ukraine, so you would deal with paying or receiving any bribes. I don't think so.
The other thing that surprised me in my experience in Kyiv is the level of integration between Ukraine and Russia. And, you know, I think that the statistic I heard is that 1 in 4 Ukrainians had a blood relative living in Russia, but also just in business. You know, we went, you know, 1 hour we were meeting with a Ukrainian bank that reported to someone in Germany, and the next hour we were meeting with a Russian bank that reported to someone in Moscow. And the industrial activity was very integrated, even in 2006, 2008, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, after independence. There was an incredible amount of integration between Russia and Ukraine. How did the Ukrainian economy deal with a war, with a separation, complete separation, obviously, from Russia?
Definitely, it was a hard transition. Definitely, as we discussed, Western involvement and Western economic help helped with that transition. Look, in the 90s, Kyiv was mostly Russian speaking. Everywhere you would go, you would mostly hear Russian language, not Ukrainian. Now it's vice versa. So like most of the people speak Ukrainian. You can speak Russian, but of course, so if you know some basic Ukrainian, it helps. So like I studied and continue studying Ukrainian. So therefore I managed well, especially with young people who were expecting so that you have some level of Ukrainian in case you don't speak English. So I pretended I don't speak English. So like I tried to speak Ukrainian to them, and then needed some Russian words to help me out. But yes, you're completely right. It was a tough transition period. I think it's over. Russian business is out. Ties are cut. Remains to be seen what will happen after war, but definitely it will be huge reluctance to renew these ties, and definitely Ukrainians will do whatever it takes to look westwards, I believe.
You told me that you thought, if we turn to Russia, that Russia was unprepared for the war, and that Russia was weak. Tell me about that.
Well, completely. completely. The Kremlin believed that it will take 3 to 7 days to take over the country, that it will be people awaiting them on Kiev streets with flowers, and be happy so that Russians would come. So this was a complete growth miscalculation, not understanding the reality. And also military-wise, Russia lost a lot of troops, a lot of people being kicked out from the suburbs of Kiev. So I was, one of my friends live in Irpin, and Irpin is bordering Bucha, so like where Russians were in. So therefore I saw destroyed houses, and people gave me like photos showing what happened there, including also explaining how many Russians were actually killed there, so like losing their life. Definitely, so Russians were completely unprepared, so that Ukraine would fight. And I think so that most of the Westerners also did not believe so that Ukraine would be fighting and would be such successfully fighting.
How's the Russian economy today? Is it collapsing? Is it not collapsing? What's your assessment of the Russian economy?
As soon as we as Westerners continue to buy and pay for Russian energy, Russia will be okay. The huge paradox is so that we as Westerners, as Europeans, on the one hand side, help Ukraine military and financially in order for Ukrainians to buy weapons and kill Russians. On the other hand side, we continue by the Russian energy, financing Russia for producing and buying weapons to kill Ukrainians. So therefore, unfortunately, the paradox is so that we are on both sides of this war, so which is shame, is ridiculous, and had to be stopped as soon when the war started. And this is kind of a policy failure of Western politicians, both on the EU side, most of all, but also on the US side as well.
What do you think the impact of sanctions have been? Have they been successful?
Sort of, but rather not than yes. There are two parts of that answer. Sanctions are structured very well. The way they are written, they would stop Russian war machine functioning if enforced. The problem comes from the fact so that they are not enforced, and that Russia, of course, constantly finds a way, the loopholes, how to circumvent sanctions. And then you have a bunch of neighboring countries, in a way, directly or indirectly helping with that. And of course, a big, huge challenge is so that, first of all, China is behind this, and China is a big help for sanction circumvention. And also other large countries such as India, is also kind of a semi supporter of the sanctions circumvention as well.
You think that Russia might have some problems with the North Caucasus? Why? Why is that important?
Yeah, look, in the 90s, Russia has a huge military conflict with Chechnya. Many people were killed on both sides. And then at some point of time, the Kremlin found a way to stop it. And the way it was done, it's by making a deal and heavily financing Chechnya. My personal view, so without going into details and into figures, this peace was just bought for a huge amount of money. As resources becoming more scarce, now we come back to this sanctions question. Economy is still functioning, but it's more difficult to run the economy. It's more difficult to find the resources to fund and subsidize other regions. And I think so this might be kind of a challenge for North Caucasus at some point of time to say, okay, you paid us now for 20 plus years. Why no, you are not continuing paying us? So this might be an issue, I believe.
We're going to take a break and come back with some concluding comments in just a minute with our expert from Latvia and Eastern Europe, Edvin Kornelius. Edvin made the comment to me that he doesn't think this is Putin's war, this is Russia's war, and that the hope of many people that if Putin is gone somehow, that things would change. Edvin doesn't think that. We're going to come back and ask him, is this Russia's war or Putin's war? Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We're having a really interesting conversation with Edvin Kornelius, who is a Latvian expert, a Eastern European expert. He's lived for 15 years in Russia. He's a banking executive historically, and now a consultant. And he specializes in providing strategic advisory services to companies and people interested in looking at Eastern Europe and investment opportunities. You made a very provocative comment in what you sent me, Edvin, which was you think this is not Putin's war, this is Russia's war, and that if Putin died, the war would continue. That's not the perception that we have in the West. The West perception is that it's all about Putin. Why do you have this opinion, sir?
Yeah, first of all, let's look in the 90s when the Soviet Union collapsed. And when many people felt very humiliated in Russia, when they suddenly, for being one of the two superpowers, became a weak country which needed to be bailed out by International Monetary Fund and receive food aid from the US. It was a very painful period. And when Putin came to power, one of the narratives he developed is like what we hear now in the US, is to make Russia and Russians great again, make again a superpower. So he developed this sense of national belonging to a super nation. And he actually launched, I can call it this mechanism, which is very difficult to stop. Nowadays, we have millions of people benefiting from the war economically in Russia. We see that the structure of the economy changed. It's in a war mode. We also see that it's quite difficult for the Kremlin to stop the war and find a way how to employ these people coming back from the front line, how to start thinking again, how to revive economy. It's more complicated than continue running the country in a war mode. And historically, Russia never was, at least from my point of view, very successful economically. And there are, of course, a lot of debates. It depends where people come from with the different arguments. But I find it difficult to imagine that suddenly overnight Putin is gone. And then everything changes. Yes, I might be wrong. Maybe, as we call him, a dictator leaves things change, so we have other guys, but the thinking, the mindset, so this patriotic gene, what the Kremlin created, I don't believe it will disappear. And please pay attention so that I do whatever it takes, not to use Putin, but to use the Kremlin. I do it on purpose because, in my understanding, it's not one person running the show. It's quite a big group of people where Putin, so it's just one of them. So therefore, I think we over-exaggerate, so like his intelligence, his capacity and capabilities. So like we are for too high opinion about him, I believe.
Last question, Edwin. How's this all end, do you think? Or does it?
Say it again, please.
How does this all end? Or does it?
I believed in the beginning of this year, so that Mr. Trump will find some solution, not necessarily a good one, but some solution acceptable to both parties to stop the war, and then take some time to find a way to durable peace, so to speak. It doesn't look like that from today's point of view. The way Mr. Trump ran the negotiations gave Putin a belief so that he is much stronger. Definitely the Kremlin feels that the US and Mr. Trump are weak, so that his team is super weak. And this, of course, creates a lot of challenges going forward. Worst case scenario, US just is out of this war, saying it's all up to Europeans now, like to clean up the mess. Europe is divided. No real leaders. A lot of discussions forward about the military budget and who does what. And this, of course, creates a huge advantage for the Kremlin to succeed and maybe even start thinking about additional military adventures. Best case scenario, so that somehow the White House realizes so that historically Europe relied on US help, remains very dependent military and psychologically, and that the US should play a role and help at least to find a solution for this very, very complex situation. Remains to be seen. I'm very carefully observing. Some signals say to me it's a disaster, especially so like when I listened to this Witkov's interview. I think it was completely awful. So like without any further comments, showing a complete weakness of Trump's administration. I hope this guy so will be removed, and I hope very much so like still there will be another person found as an envoy for Mr. Trump doing a better job.
Edvin Kornelius, thank you so much. I really appreciate you joining us today. This has been very illuminating as to what's going on in Eastern Europe, and excellent to hear it from someone that is so close to the situation and so experienced in Eastern Europe and in Russia. Appreciate it.
Many thanks, Brian. My pleasure.
That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online, even from Latvia, at www.saga960am.ca. Good night, everybody.